Hello, and welcome to the May episode of Thought of You, a monthly podcast where me, Amelia Ruby, and my friend Taylor Elise Morrison share our group chat with the world. This is our fifth episode of Thought of You, and I just want to say we have been loving all of the people hanging out with us on Substack, leaving comments, reminding us about the stuff we talked about and then forgot to ever mention again. We're incredibly grateful for you. And if you would like to join the fun, dear listener, you can find us at thoughtofyou.substack.com. You can comment on every episode and let us know what you're thinking about. Like, if you've ever thought of us, join us on the Thought of You Substack, and we will think of you too. So, that plug aside, we start every episode with our first thought, best thought segment, which is just where Taylor and I bring something that is feeling present in our lives. We learned this phrase from some creative circles I was in, where, like, when you're brainstorming, you just put the first thought on the board. It's your best thought for now. We go with it. Or I also learned it from my partner, who's a chess teacher, where your first instinct, the first move you want to make, sometimes just go with that. First thought, best thought. So, Taylor, all of that contextualized, what is your first thought, best thought of the month?
The color red is my first thought, best thought.
We love it.
And really, this is about noticing. I love my therapist that I've been working with because I chose her. She's really about embodiment and connecting to your body. She's also an art therapist. And the homework that she gave me was to notice different colors and objects and how they make me feel in my body. And so I've been really aware of, and honestly, bless Matt's heart, because I'll be like, do you see that color? I really like that color. I'm just like a kid again who's expanding my vocabulary of not just this is the color green or this is the color red, but this is my relationship to it right now. And I noticed a lot of the colors that I'm drawn to right now are versions of a really bold red. What's also fun is that Matt is a designer. So like we had a whole conversation about like crimson versus maroon versus this type of red and like really getting into the different tonality of it. And it's been really fun. There's a bush around the corner from me that has this gorgeous like pinky red of these buds that I'm sure will bloom any moment. But what Matt and I love about this tree or this bush is that the leaves have elements of red. So it's like this combination of green and red, and then it's all culminating in this red bud. And the simple assignment of just being aware of colors, which are always all around us, has given a little bit more whimsy and presence to my day in a way that, with everything that's going on in the world, is nice to just spend a few minutes enraptured by a bush in your neighborhood.
I love this. Although as soon as you said enraptured by a bush, my mind was immediately like Moses. Burning bush.
My mind went somewhere dirtier than that. So
when I repeated it, I was like, woof, here I'm going in this month. No, but I love that so much. And what was coming up for me about red as you were speaking, as I was just thinking about all of the summer fruit that will be coming our way, whether it's strawberry red or watermelon red or cherry red. The other place I just saw a lot of red is that for my birthday last month, I asked JJ to make me a Shirley Temple, which is a beverage I have probably not consumed in 25 years, but it was so much fun. And just like putting the grenadine in the Sprite with the maraschino cherries, like it's so red and it's so silly and frivolous. And it was also like the best part of my birthday was drinking this like incredibly sugary red beverage. So I'm with you on the color red. I'm going to be thinking a lot more about it and noticing it more in the month ahead.
Yeah. And it's such a power color too. Like I feel like my subconscious is inviting me to step into some of my own power as I notice the red and how striking it is. It's like, oh, you could have some of that too, Taylor. Or you already have that. Maybe you're just covering it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my first thought, best thought. What's on your mind this month?
So for me this month, I am thinking about books. I started a podcast at the end of last year called Pleasure Reading, and I've been making all of these bookish episodes about what I've been reading, and it has me more focused on what I'm reading than ever. And it has also gotten me kind of more wrapped up in like the trends around reading, like what is everybody else reading? What's popular right now? I don't use TikTok, so I'm not on Book Talk, which is oft talked about for bookish trends, but I do watch a lot of bookish videos on YouTube or BookTube and kind of keep up that way. And I am both like very excited by book trends and like equally appalled by them, something I'm noticing. And so I made a lot of content for Pleasure Reading Podcast at the start of this year. And in April and May, I've decided to just step back a bit and do less content making about what I'm reading and try to do a bit more mood reading and just reading what strikes me and what I'm interested in to see how it shifts what I'm picking up. I am a pretty avid reader. I was going to say like a prolific reader, but I don't know if that's a thing. I read a lot, essentially. Like I've already read over 50 books this year. It's the end of April. So I'm averaging like a couple books a week. And for my first thought, best thought, I just wanted to share a few of the books that I've read in the past week, actually like in the past 4 days, because I read a lot over the weekend. And I want to share very briefly one book I read that everybody else is reading, one book I read that nobody else is reading, and then another book I read that like I think falls in the middle of those two things. And as I was reading them, I was like, oh, this is interesting because I feel differently about the book based on if I've encountered a lot of discourse about it and if I think I'm going to be able to talk to other people about it. So anyway, the books were Emily Henry's Great Big Beautiful Life, which I'm holding up for anyone watching the video. This is like one of the most anticipated releases of the year. Emily Henry is a romance writer. Her books have been purchased, like millions of copies of her books have been sold. And she has quite a few romances. She started in YA, moved to romance. Her most famous or popular are probably Beach Read and Book Lovers. And Great Big Beautiful Life is a romance, but it leans more toward general fiction than any of her other releases. And it's been really interesting. It was interesting to read the book, which I liked well enough, but I feel like I could not read this book. Like I couldn't escape the discourse around this book as I was reading this book. Like just from even when I tried to avoid review content for it, just like the general like imagery and things I'm seeing on YouTube or in newsletters I subscribe to, a lot of people are reading the book, they're sharing their impressions, and I like couldn't get it out of my head as I was reading. And in some ways that was fun because as soon as I finished, I went and watched a ton of videos and like devoured other people's impressions of the book, including like a 90-minute video from one of my favorite BookTube creators where she talked about every single Emily Henry book and why she liked this one and didn't like others. And like, I'm truly consuming like feature-length film content about the books that I'm reading, which we'll link it in the show notes if anyone wants to watch that video. It's pretty good. But it was so interesting to have that experience reading this book. And then the next book I read was this book, Reprieve, by James Hahn Matson. This book came out, I think, about 4 years ago now, and nobody is reading this book right now. Like, I don't actually even know how I came across it, and it was not a particularly popular book when it came out. I think I looked at the Goodreads stats, which is just like a very high level overview of like how many readers have rated a book. Emily Henry's new book, Great Big Beautiful Life, has 30,000 ratings in the first week it's been out. We're recording this exactly a week after it released. Reprieve has been out for almost 4 years and it has about 7,000 ratings. So like much, much, much less popular. And I really enjoyed reading it. And also now I have no one to talk to about it. And I am sad or like I feel the book slipping away because I don't have any way to sort of like express and be in conversation around it. And that really has me reflecting on like what is the role of these sort of like parasocial content spaces that I'm engaging in book reviews, because it's not like I'm talking to anybody about Emily Henry's Great Big Beautiful Life. Although I guess I did text my sister-in-law. So Michelle, if you listen to this, you do count. I did text you about it. You just haven't finished reading it yet. So I can't talk to you about it. But it's like, there's something that really like fills me up in seeing the content and like hearing what other people think about it, or listening to podcasts. I'll often listen to podcast episodes about books I loved. And when there's no content, like when I can't find any content creators or people in my real life to talk to about a book I enjoyed, it does like give me a certain kind of feeling. And I'm trying to sort through that. And like, I guess I could make a podcast episode about this book and I could like see if people respond to that. Maybe someone will talk to me about it. But I've just been kind of sitting with that reflection of like, what does it mean to read? What does it mean to read in conversation? And then what does it mean to not? I also have read some other books this year, like especially some like really smutty books that I would rather no one ever know I read and I will not admit to publicly. So it's not every book that I want conversation around, but I'm really like thinking a lot about this. And then the third book I read this week, just to wrap up my extended first thought, best thought, the third book was Finlay Donovan is Killing It, which is a sort of like murder mystery book that came out a few years ago, I think, and is now like the first book in a series. There are quite a few of these. And this book was like highly recommended by a number of content creators I follow. And I've had like very mid feelings about it, like 3 stars, I don't, whatever to me. And so I'm just kind of sitting with what is the role of content in relationship to art? What is the role of conversation in relationship to art? What happens when content takes the place of conversation? And how does my like reading life and my own reading podcast interject in all of that?
I find this impulse less with books, but more when I'm watching TV shows or movies where I'm like, who's talking about this? Did anyone else pick up on this? What are the themes that people saw? And sometimes I feel like I actually was just thinking about this. There's this show called Kevin Can F Himself that was originally on like Showtime, but now you can find it on Netflix, it's just a beautiful work and conversation about living with a narcissistic partner done in this really artful way. And like, I saw a decent amount of conversation with the first season, but then it all really comes to a head the second season and no one was really talking about it. And I'm like, I wish there was all this discourse around it. So I do find myself, I will end a movie, end a show. And then for me, I tend to go on subreddit or on Reddit. I tend to see if there is a subreddit dedicated to this and be like, okay, these are my people. These people are talking about it. But I'm not always necessarily talking about it with people in my life. And I don't know if that's because I assume that they have not consumed it or because there is this parasocial situation where I don't even really post on Reddit, but to see that someone else had similar thoughts to me or had a different thought and now I get to sit with that on my own, it is part of my consumption experience. And now I have to sit with what that means for me. So thank you for the existential questions on consumption.
Yeah. Well, you can sit with those and I will be noticing the color red everywhere I go. And it feels like we can circle back in the future. But I would agree. I also often find myself craving conversation around television shows. And I've been super excited that we get to have some of those conversations here. So I know that one thing that we definitely want to circle back to this episode from last month is the White Lotus finale. So I feel like we should just like dive right into that circle back. I guess if you haven't watched White Lotus and you still want to watch it and you don't want it spoiled for you, skip ahead. We'll put a link or a timestamp in the show notes for where to go to, but we're going to talk about it as the first part of our circle back section. So Taylor, what did you think of the final episode of season 3?
First word that comes to mind for me is chaotic. It was just a lot of chaos. I do feel like I should get some points for the whole fruit situation. I mean, it was kind of obvious that something was going to happen and they kept showing. So it's like, yeah, you can put 2 and 2 together. It was so, one of my favorite parts was just seeing Piper's little transformation of like, oh yeah, I don't want this anymore. I'm going to stop cosplaying, which we kind of got into last time. Like, I'm going to stop cosplaying this person who's going to go live in a monastery and I'm just going to put back on the role of this rich white girl from North Carolina.
Yeah.
For how long, we don't really know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was a delightful little, I don't even know if delightful is the word, but I smirked a little bit like, okay, now we're seeing the real you. And then the whole death situation. I can't remember if we talked about this idea of threes and how there is a lot of that. So we did see 3 people actually die. I feel this all the time when I'm like watching any action thing. I'm like, this was all so avoidable. To me, it was kind of like, y'all should have just gone to therapy, and we would, like, my heart rate would have been lower watching that. And I know that that's not what makes for good TV, but it's like yet another example of you didn't go to therapy and now 3 people are dead. And how many other people are traumatized because they're supposed to be on a health retreat and now there's a mass shooting.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me how they, to some degree, try to build that into the episode, because you do see Rick, Walton Goggins' character, like try to meet with the stress management wellness person, and she's like, I have another client that's obviously like not going to therapy. But like you see that I think they are trying to point to something there of these sort of like superficial wellness interventions into healing are like too little too late. At least in this instance it absolutely was. And I definitely agree with you that in a lot of these shows, the White Lotus specifically, I feel like a lot of the conflict, it's actually similar to how I feel when I read romance novels, where I'm like, if you all had had literally one conversation, there would be no conflict for this book to be about. And I think in the White Lotus, it's many more than one conversation. It would have required a lot of therapy sessions for that degree of conflict to dissipate, but it does really feel like, I think especially this show overall, but especially this season, I felt that sort of like wellness retreats for super rich people are not intervening in any of the actual problems.
Absolutely. And even I saw people talking on threads about like, she should have helped him. He was clearly in distress. And I mean, I'm sure this is me as a Black woman, but I'm like, again, when I say he should have gone to therapy, I mean, he should have been in therapy long before he ever went on this trip. Like, he clearly had issues. And so for him to get to the point of this distress, which again, created by him, no one told him to procure a gun in a foreign country and like attempt to shoot this man that you thought killed your father, but then you find out, like, it just, again, all of this. And so you get to this point where you are in the situation that you created, and now this woman of color is supposed to come save you. Like, no, I'm sorry. And so that was annoying me. Speaking of another woman of color, the whole thing with Natasha Rothwell's character, which I think they were trying to make parallels to her experience with Tanya, but it felt to me, and I'm curious your thought, it felt to me different because what was his name? Her love interest name? Porn Chai. Like, he brought that up to her. She did not solicit and like fully foster it. And again, from me being a Black woman, I'm like, get away from these white people. Like, you almost got shot here. This man is trying to kill you in Thailand. Like, you don't need to stay here. But I saw people saying like, she should have stayed with him. She should have done XYZ. And so Mike White, I do not give him much credit for writing anyone except for rich white people. And I think we talked about last time how Natasha Rothwell had to help him be like, this is what a Black woman would actually do. But those two moments that we get with Natasha Rothwell's character and then with the character of the meditation teacher is like a little conversation, a little insight into some of the dynamics at play, and ultimately like the pressure that we put on these two women of color to save, in this case, a white man and then a local, and the different dynamics at play, like a rich white man versus someone who's a local and has a lot less means.
Yeah, I'm really glad you're highlighting those dynamics specifically. And I also saw the discourse around like Belinda should have stayed with Porn Chai. And I was like, what do you think people owe somebody because they slept together one whole time on vacation? Like it was nonsensical to me. And I think really spoke to like the projections of people, what they think women owe men. Like they had this sort of really temporary relationship isn't even the word. Like they knew each other sort of for a brief period of time. So I think that you're right to point to that dynamic as this place where people are projecting a lot and expecting even more from a Black woman on the show. And that plays into like real life dynamics as well. And then with the character of the woman who was the stress management consultant, whose character name I'm not remembering at this point, like I also think it's important, like, she's not seemingly like a licensed mental health practitioner, right? When people are like, oh, she should have known he was in crisis and done these things, like, she doesn't have some sort of like accreditation and like rules or regulatory body who's saying how you handle these things. The perception I get is that maybe she had some kind of like spiritual background or something in meditation that helped her guide these sessions. But what we think these characters owe each other is a fascinating part of the conversation of White Lotus to me. And I love that you're pointing to specifically like how gender and race play into that, and these moments where we as viewers get to or are asked to or have to unpack what we think women of color owe everybody else on the show.
Do you have more that you want to add here? Because I want to bring in another group of rich white people to circle back to.
Oh, please do.
Okay, so last month, we talked about Careless People, which is a book about Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, all of this stuff. And we talked about it when I was halfway through the book. I finished the book earlier this week, and I was reminded of this conversation I had with someone on Instagram about the second season of White Lotus, which I guess, spoiler about that second season, it's not even fully a spoiler, but one of the characters, who is this rich woman, Tanya, Greg/Gary's ex-wife, her assistant, she just kept doing stuff that to me, I was like, this girl has no street smarts. Like, she's just navigating Italy. It's gorgeous. And I'm like, there's a lot of points here where I would have made different decisions. At the end of the Careless People book, I started to feel that way a lot about the author, where I was like, oh, honey, at the beginning, okay, sure, I can buy that you're idealistic and you think that Facebook can do some good in the world. But like, after a certain point, there are all these signs. You know who these people are. And yes, there are considerations about immigration status and being a parent and healthcare that I think speak to larger societal issues that we have. Like, it's messed up that you have to be considering healthcare and whether or not you stay in a toxic work environment. But it just felt like it was way too long where she was saying it could get better. And then when it got really, really bad and she didn't have options, I'm like, you seem like a pretty connected person. You seem like you can get out of here. And ultimately, a lot of this came down to stock options and like her wanting to get into this wealthy class and this proximity to wealth. And so I thought it was a really, I'm not a parent, I can't fully speak to this, but I just thought it was interesting to see her critiquing so heavily the people at Facebook, especially Mark Zuckerberg. Like, the more I read it, the more I was like, man, this guy stumbled into success, like kept falling, and somehow someone kept being there to catch him. But she stayed because she wanted a fraction of what they have. And yeah, I just liked her a lot less by the end. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to hold up my copy of Careless People for the viewers in the back by Sarah Wynne Williams. And I would agree with you, Taylor. My impression by the end of this book was that she was definitely painting herself in a very positive light that I felt like I could see the contrast between how she was characterizing many of her decisions versus how she was critiquing the actions of others at Facebook. And I mean, I thought it was really sad and I guess just sad, like that the reason she actually left had to do with the fallout of the sexual harassment allegation that she made against her boss and being dismissed on her account because that was not taken seriously or affirmed by the people in power at Meta, even though there were witnesses and all of these other things. And it really muddies that water, right? Like, I want to always stand up for women who are harassed or assaulted at work and their right to like call that out and get support around it. And also, I want to critique her complicity in all of the systems that she is saying, like, this is the problem. I don't think that she comes out of the book looking like a hero. I think maybe she was trying to portray herself as some sort of heroine many times, but that is not what I took away. Like, it really took this very personal, horrible experience for her not even to quit. Like that didn't actually even happen. But I think it's definitely, again, like indicative of gender and power, how a lot of this ended up playing out. And I'm with you on like I by the end of the book was not willing to suspend my disbelief that she was like this sort of idealistic worker. I'm like, absolutely not. You are so complicit in so many of these things. But I do appreciate that she wrote a book about it, and now I know more about the inner workings of this company that makes me like even more affirmed in my stance on how horrible they are. Like I do think that coming to light has value, even if I disagree about how she portrayed herself in some of the sort of events that she describes.
Yeah, I'm glad I read it. And my notes just say I finished Careless People and wow, WTF. That's how I feel. That's all I have left to say about it.
Well, this episode is going to be full of like essentially like white women WTF. So I think that there will be plenty of opportunities to circle back to Sarah Wynne Williams, to circle back to Piper from White Lotus, to circle back to all of these details and our ongoing conversation about gender and power and race and these things we've been unpacking kind of since we started the show. So I feel like, okay, I have a final circle back, which is very brief, which is that I would like to reassure the people that I did, in fact, get my nails done since we last spoke. My last time, my April first thought, best thought was that I had not gotten a manicure in like 7 weeks. And because I always have dip nails on, it just grows out and I can't do anything about it. So I got that taken care of. I got a little birthday mani-pedi with my mom and my aunt, and that was very sweet. And we did it all together. And we have our next one scheduled for Mother's Day. The nail salon we go to in Lincoln is super sweet. And on Mother's Day, they always bring like a full like brunch situation. And if you have an appointment, you get like mimosas and little treats, and it's very fun. So we are doing that for Mother's Day, and that will be our May nail appointment. So for anyone out there worried about the state of my hands, which is approximately 0 people, they're doing fine. And this month's manicure is very cute. It has little flowers on it. I always get nail art for my birthday. I don't usually, but as a birthday treat, we do a little bit of nail art. So, okay, let's transition into our first topic, shall we? Feeling ready for it, Taylor?
I'm so ready. Yeah, we have a lot to say about this.
We do. This is going to be fun. So today's episode kind of has like one, maybe 2 topics, and we're going to wrap it all into a conversation about the film Sinners. So Taylor and I have both seen this movie. It is directed by Ryan Coogler. It stars Michael B. Jordan, and Sinners is a movie about many things. It's about race and Jim Crow segregation in the US. It's about vampires. It's about family. It's about religion. It's about the South and Chicago and Black migration from the South to Chicago and the possibility that comes with that or doesn't come with that, and how that's impacted people's lives in the US. So Sinners is a movie about many, many things. And we are going to talk about the content of the movie a little bit later. So that'll be kind of like our next topic. But we wanted to start by just highlighting the director of this movie, Ryan Coogler, talking about the deal that he made with the studio that put out the film, and then also just highlighting like its box office success, which has been huge. It had a great run its first weekend. Its second weekend, the ticket sales dropped, I think I saw, by only 6%. So essentially it made just as much money the second weekend as it did the first. And we'll put some links to those stats in the show notes because I'm not remembering the dollar amount off the top of my head, but it's doing very, very well. I think one of the highest openings for an original film, if not this like decade, definitely this year. And so we're seeing Sinners have this great box office success, and it's putting a lot of attention on the director and the studio that put the movie out. So we want to use that as a way to have a broader conversation about artists or creators and how they make a living. And then we'll circle back to the content of the movie at the end. So if you're here for vampire chat, stick it out. It was coming for you. But if you're here for like creative business owner chat, now's your time to shine, because we're going to dive into that next. So Taylor, now that I have like really contextualized what I think is happening here, could you tell us a little bit or like tell the listeners about like Ryan Coogler and why there's been so much conversation about how he made and sold this movie?
So as you said that, the first thing that came to mind, I was not planning to say this, but I thought of Beyonce. Like, you know, you're that bitch when you cause all this conversation. And that's kind of who Ryan Coogler is. Like, he's not even 40 yet. He kind of kicked off the more popular side of his career with Michael Jordan in a movie called Fruitvale Station. Yeah, Fruitvale Station. I was like, what is the first part of the station? Fruitvale Station, really gorgeous film, does Black Panthers. So then he's getting into Marvel territory, bigger budgets, does Black Panthers 1 and 2, exceeds expectations, revives the revives the Rocky series under this Creed franchise. And then really with Sinners is his first original film of this size and scale. So he's had, like, if you look at the stats for all of these movies that he's directed, they're really insane. And yet there's still this conversation, be it because of race, be it because of age, be it because of both of those things, that he doesn't deserve the deal that he ended up getting. So the deal that he got, and I pulled up some articles. I am not a journalist, so fact checked all of this. We'll add it in the chat. But essentially, the deal that he got is that from the beginning, he gets a cut of ticket sales. And then after 25 years, he gets the rights back and he gets royalties from that. And that for him, this is really important because when we talk about some of the themes of the film, it's about like Black people owning their essence, owning their, not even intellectual property, but like the soul that they bring to their creative work. And so for this movie, it felt important for him to do this. He's not the first director to get this type of deal. It's most often being compared to Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He got a similar deal. And yet for here, there's conversation with words about like, this was very generous, as if it's a gift, as if he isn't producing this box office hit that did 45-ish million domestic the first weekend. And then, like you said, it only dropped 4.9% in its second weekend. So it is on track to be profitable. Even though it had the smashing success of an opening weekend, people were like, I think the New York Times headline was, it's successful with an asterisk. And there literally was like, there's a big asterisk in the title. And like other people are not being measured on how is this going to be profitable right away, but there's this standard that Ryan Coogler is being held to. So that's a little bit about like the numbers that are happening here, and a teensy bit about the discourse that's happening in terms of why is this so important for Ryan Coogler specifically. The last thing I'll say is that people are also positioning as like, this could end the industry if directors start making the money that they're supposed to be making, which strikes me as some fear-mongering from people in power. But I could just keep ranting about this. So I'm going to pause and sip my tea.
Yes, sip the tea, literally and figuratively, please. And everything you just said was so coherent, definitely not ranting. And also, we welcome ranting on this podcast. And with listeners, give us your rants about Sinners. We do want to hear them. All favorable, please. But I think that something that's been interesting for me about this discourse is the way that I sort of came to this film. So I think that a lot of people have learned about it through some of this discourse and through the articles and through the general media. I learned about it through like the horror community because I love horror films so much. When I saw like Ryan Coogler directed horror movie, I was like, cool, interesting. Let's see what's happening. And I was so intrigued by that. And I saw the first trailer and I was like, this looks like interesting. historical horror is not always like something I enjoy as much as some other types of horror. I'm a huge supernatural horror person. So when the first trailer dropped, it wasn't clear that there was a supernatural element to this film. I didn't think. And so I like kept my eye on it, but I wasn't fully immersed in it. And then we see like it's a vampire movie and I was like, okay, much more interested. But I was not aware of like the broader discourse around the deal or anything like that until I listened to the most recent, as of when we're recording this episode, of Vibe Check and heard a lot more about it. And when I listened to that episode and learned there was such a broader discourse, I was like, well, now I have to see this film because like always want to support Black directors, Black writers, films about these sorts of topics and like their box office success. Like, as you know, I've been talking a lot about musicians and artists on this show. Like, if we don't go see the movies in theaters, they can't keep going to theaters, right? Like, that's just such a clear reality of the film industry. And having heard about this film from a horror perspective, I went to see it like with this lens of like, is this really a horror movie? And like, that's a lot of what I was interested in. And then like hearing the broader discourse around the deal and race and the movie industry and all of this, like that piques my intellectual interest. But my first interest was just like in the movie itself and like, how is it as a film? And I thought the film itself was gorgeous and glorious and so good. And when I saw that, it made me even more pissed off about the discourse because a lot of this discourse was being pushed by film critics, by industry people. And I'm like, your whole job is to uplift amazing films or to create conversation about film. And you're choosing to do this about such a good movie when you are silent about every single totally bullshit horror film I've seen in theaters over the past 5 years. And I've seen a lot of them, really bad ones, many of them about nuns for some reason. Like, I go to theaters and show up for those movies, and when they do like B- numbers, you're writing a super laudatory review about how well they did against all the odds and expectations. And then when this movie is like beating records and doing so well, you're writing these like bullshit pieces about the generosity of the studio. And obviously I know that this has to do with the whiteness of criticism, film criticism specifically. I know it has to do with race and racism and all of these things, but it was just like, it so viscerally pissed me off as I was listening to the Vibe Check episode and realizing like a lot of the discourse, and then saw it and like, I want to know your take, please.
Yeah, a couple things. You talked about how you came to the movie. For me, so my husband, Matt, is also really into horror. And so he had seen it. He was actually really surprised because I came to him on opening weekend like, hey, do you want to go see this? We like went to a day party and then we came home and walked our dog and went to see Sinners. And it was incredible. For me, though, I also did something similar with Nope. And there is something I said this is a direct quote from our group chat, but like I will always ride for Black horror films. Like if I can muster it, and what I'm not saying explicitly is I'm a highly sensitive person. I can need a lot to decompress. In our previous episode, we talked about Paradise. I literally was like doing deep breathing and like watching comedy afterwards so that I could enjoy the art, but also re-regulate my nervous system. But there's something for me of if someone is going to do something, I went to see Get Out too. Like if someone is going to have the opportunity to create something original in a world where everyone's on franchises, and this is, I don't know if it's a critique of Ryan Coogler, but like the only opportunities that he's taken are franchises outside of Fruitvale Station. So for him to swing and say, okay, I think I'm ready to do this thing, and he would have to know how high the stakes are. Like if he doesn't do well in this original, he might be relegated to just keep doing franchises for the rest of his career. So it felt really important to, I don't want to say I saw it just to support. I saw it because everyone was saying how amazing it was. I saw threads where someone said, this is Scaredy Cat approved. And then also it was a Black director directing an original work with a gorgeous group of Black people. all casted in it. So I think that's like a responsibility that I feel with certain pieces. And you didn't say this explicitly either, Amelia, but I'm pretty sure I read or heard somewhere that, like, in general, horror does worse in theaters than other genres. So there's this double element of both. It can be difficult for a horror to do well, and then you're adding that it's a horror featuring Black themes. So I wanted to go out and support, and like I'm strongly considering going to see it again because it was so good, and I can't stop thinking about like the different themes, and I kind of want to see it again knowing what to expect so I can look for different pieces that maybe I missed the first time.
Yeah, I love all those reflections. And I think, it's interesting how horror stands at the box office because historically it has done so much more poorly than other genres. But I think that has really changed over the past, even just like 5 or 6 years. We're seeing many, many more horror releases go into theaters, and even like indie releases like the Terrifier films now get theatrical releases. You should never see those. I actually don't recommend them to anyone. I've not watched more than the first one, but especially for you, Taylor, I would never, ever, 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 ever recommend those. But it is basically a film that was like a super niche indie release. And then when the third one came out, had a theatrical release, like even like widely across the US, not a limited release, like a full release. And so we're seeing like the rise in popularity of horror. I was thinking, like, what would be a sort of parallel to Sinners if I could, like, think about a recent horror film that I felt like got such a great reception. And the one that came to mind was Nosferatu, that Robert Eggers directed and that came out.
I actually saw that in theaters too. But that was a birthday present to Matt. I was like, I love you. I will see this horror movie with you.
That's very kind of you. I did not see it in theaters. Robert Eggers is not quite my guy. Like, I don't love his work, just like on a personally taste level. But I did watch it at home when the extended cut was released on Peacock, I think a few months ago. But that film in its opening weekend, I just looked it up, did like 21.65 million over the first weekend, did about 40 over the first 5 days. And so we're seeing a film that was just like lauded everywhere as beautiful and striking and amazing, and like made less money than Sinners did. And Sinners is like embroiled in all of this discourse. And I just find it, again, like infuriating because also like, I mean, honestly, if I'm like putting all my cards on the table, I didn't think Nosferatu was that great. I thought it was like a middling, mediocre horror film for me. I think there were parts of it that were beautiful, but I didn't care for the characters as much. I didn't care for the storyline they chose. I didn't love it. And I didn't think it really offered that much that was unique or original, especially in such a like well-trodden, I mean, you can't really call Nosferatu a franchise, but like whatever story that's been told again and again and again. And so I just feel really struck in this moment by the difference in reception and coverage of those films, both from established directors, both in the horror genre, and how differently they're being spoken about. Like, it's just racism. Like, that's just, like, I find no other answer to why that is happening.
Yeah, and if you tune into the Vibe Check episode, they mention this episode of The Town, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. And hearing this Black man just hold his own and keep going back to the data and keep like, and I'll give a little credit to the host. He was trying to play the devil's advocate on these points, but like when you're listening to the points, they just do not make, like, there is not an explanation other than racism. Try as you might to dance around it. So yeah, I mean, what's great is that he did it. It's doing amazing. I'm sure it's going to be profitable, and it's only going to open more doors for Black people and other people who are marginalized to tell these great original stories. Like, I don't need to see another Marvel movie. I would rather see something that came out of someone's brain that is new. So I'm just putting that into the universe. More of that, please. Less franchises.
Yeah. And I also, and this brings something kind of a different layer into the conversation. But all of this conversation also reminded me a lot of just different conversations I've heard around the director Nia DaCosta. I don't quite know how it's pronounced, but she is a Black woman who directed The Marvels. She was the first Black woman to direct a Marvel movie, and that movie did broadly flop in theaters, and it was very critically panned. But I knew her from her directing the adaptation of Candyman, or sort of the renewal of Candyman that came out a few years ago. And that movie was also not very critically well received, but because it was a horror film and because I thought the original Candyman was so fascinating, like such a good movie and scared the crap out of me when I was a kid, like I prioritized seeing it and I really enjoyed her film. But just to bring a sort of lens of like to bring gender into the conversation as well as race, I've always felt like her films are just held to standards that are like impossible. And I've always felt like the conversation of critics around her work is mean-spirited and incredibly problematic. And she has not had the like box office success of Ryan Coogler, but I think does like, there's just a lot of examples like this. And I suppose I wanted to wrap her in because she has the Marvel background, the horror background, and like seeing this as like a Black woman brings another lens to the conversation.
There's all of these elements. And I think ultimately just remembering that this is a business. Like I'm watching The Studio on Apple TV, and it's a really fun, silly show that in many ways is a love story to Hollywood, but it's also critical of what it has become. And outside of laughing at like the cameos and the silliness of the show, which is essentially about this guy who loves film, but is now the director of a studio and is realizing that his role as director of a studio is in conflict with his love of film, and seeing parodied versions of these conversations and like, yeah, it's just about dollars and cents. It's a lot less about the storytelling right now. And I'm also wondering if those things have to be in conflict. Like what Sinners is showing us is that you can tell an original story that has a really specific sense of place and culture and still have it be broadly successful. And I wonder, this is something just more broadly I've been playing with in my own creative practice, is like the power of specificity and having it with people in mind. And then other people can come and watch. But I think when you try and make something that's for mass appeal, it really waters everything down. We were talking about this in my book club recently. We read like a Good Morning America book, and we spent the whole book club talking about how we would change everything and essentially make it more specific and how that would make it so much better. So there's something about the specificity, but I think we've told ourselves, and by we, I don't include myself, I mean Hollywood studios have told themselves that you can't tell a specific story and have it be profitable, and Ryan Coogler is challenging that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this takes us into like the broader conversation we want to have around creators making money and the sort of studio model versus the independent creator model to some degree. I think that there is something to like the way studios have defined success is like a giant opening weekend box office. And I don't think that is the way that most like grassroots beloved art actually releases. Like what we see with Sinners is a good opening weekend response, a great one even, and it continues and it grows because word of mouth starts to bring new people in. People stay excited. They get even more excited. Like we see more of a snowball effect, where I think with what studios are looking for, how they're defining success is a lot more of like a firework effect, like big flashy display. And then it doesn't really matter what happens because it was all done. Like it all happened at once. And I think that is not how I want to create things. And I think it's not how a lot of creators want their work to, like, it's not how they define success. And it's also not necessarily the legacy you want for your work, right? Because so many of those things that have that more like firework model of success, they can be just like a flash in the pan. They can be just like a response to something really current, but without that like lasting value. And part of what I love about like Ryan Coogler's deal in this is like, having those rights returned to him means that this work can actually like live on. Like it's going to have a legacy that he gets to determine. The studio can't just bury it in their vault and never stream it and never put it anywhere, because that happens to so many films that don't get released or just like literally, I mean, in the history, I think it's of like Universal Studios, many of those warehouses burned down and the films were lost forever. And so to like have both like work with the studio to get the wide release, get it in front of the most people and maintain that like autonomy and agency with your art. It just feels so beautiful to me. Like when I read about the deal, I was like, hell yeah, I love this. And I would love to see more ways that independent creators can partner with these like broader publishers, whether it be a studio in film or a publisher in writing, like, and maintain some of the rights and the connection to their work.
What I was struck was this idea of the legacy and the word of mouth aspect of things. We're going to link in the show notes to this State of Create, which is this research report that Patreon put out about how people are creating content, engaging with content, getting paid with content. And what I like about this report is that they're looking at the creators. They also asked fans how they like to engage and what they see as valuable. And one of the things that they talked about was the difference between long form and short form, and how most creators wanted to create the long form. There's a quote in the report where someone says, like, actually the short form is that firework. It's what might get me engagement on a platform. It's what might draw people in, but that can actually come to the detriment of my long form content. And when people were asked what they liked to pay for, it was the long form content. So I do think there is this manufacturing to bring Facebook and TikTok back into it, this manufacturing of, if I'm going to commoditize your attention, it's easier for me to do it if I do lots of short bites. But everyone's kind of saying, like, I don't want to create that and I don't want to consume that, but we all are just doing that because that is the default setting that is handed to us. So that's one thing that comes to mind. And yeah, this idea of the snowball is beautiful, and I wish we created more space for that. I wish I created more space for that. Like there's a piece, I think I mentioned this last time too, but a piece I wrote about what alligator tears means. And I wrote that almost over a year ago at this point. And I get like comments from people about how much it means to them. And now that Beyonce's going on tour, I'm getting more and more people coming to my site and reading it. And it's just so cool to have this be like a piece that I put a lot of thought and work into. But because I didn't make it like it just has to be this commoditized Substack thing, or it has to be this flash in the pan, like a LinkedIn post or an Instagram carousel. It's getting this different level of life and drawing people to me in a really fun way. So yeah, I want people to create what they want to create, and I want people to be able to be compensated. I think I have more thoughts on the compensation piece, like it's more nuanced, but I want to hand it over to you and see what's coming up for you as you think of these ideas of snowball and long and short form content or anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I love your example of your essay, and what comes up for me there is like, how can that become a zine? How can that become an audio piece? Like, I think that to me, the path of being an artist, like how I've seen it work for myself and for others, is that we have to create a lot of things and kind of be creating and releasing in flow and then see what resonates. And when something we create and goes out in the world and gets a response, gets that sort of feedback, how can we then use that sort of like energy gathered from others to create it in different forms, to add to it, to expand on it? And I think that this is really like a very common and natural way that so many creators work, right? You write an essay, maybe you put it on your website, maybe you publish it in a magazine, and you get great feedback. And then that essay becomes a book, and then that book becomes a movie or whatever it might be. I think that it's not like I'm inventing this way of working, right? Like this is a very common practice for many artists or writers particularly. But what I've really noticed is that I think because social media is short form and creates these sort of like immediate feedback loops, it creates this expectation for people that if something is not like immediately a viral hit, it is bad or good, or like you should just disregard, like discard it. And I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that's how art works. I don't think that's how the creative practice works, or how just like building an audience around your creative output works. And I see that as one of these places where there's like this impact that social media is having on art making or artists and creators, and we have to like resist some of that. I think like, I think we have to like push back if we want to like build careers and be compensated for our work, because that is not the only model of success. Like virality is not the only model of success. The firework is not the only model of success. And the snowball, or often I like to use the flywheel metaphor, like we can use other metaphors to understand what success can look and feel like. And when we do that, it can change our practices too.
I love a conversation about metaphors. And
I know you do.
Yeah, they really do inform the way that we view the world. And yeah, I think we've been talking, this is our 5th episode, like you said. So we've been bringing in conversations about film and TV and music. We've talked about the music industry a lot. And we both are traditionally published authors. There, to me, seems to be like this discontent on behalf of both the fans, or the people consuming the art, and the people creating the art, and this fear of like, I'm seeing the people who are kind of the middlemen or the gatekeepers start to quake in their boots, because people are starting to use different metaphors and realizing, oh wait, I could give this directly to people and exchange. Or, oh wait, maybe like I don't need to hold out and wait for someone to give me a book deal. I could choose to, it could be a book, it could be something else. But the thing that is coming up for me as I see this conversation is that if we start to get rid of the middlemen, then we're confronted with what things actually cost. And we have to have conversations about cost and value and exchange. And I think we're so conditioned in these old metaphors and ways of being and working that we're not fully ready. And I don't even want to say that, because there are so many people who are able to support themselves with some version of sharing their work in the world. And I think there could be more if we could change some of these paradigms.
Yeah, absolutely. So like examples I'm thinking of here would be like, we've already talked about, musicians selling their music on Bandcamp, right? So instead of making your music available through a streaming platform and then hoping people stream it and you might make some money there, actually just requiring fans to purchase it. And that is this like direct relationship that you then have with them. And yes, you may have far fewer people that to purchase your music. And yes, those people may have to pay for one album from you what they are paying for a whole month of Spotify. So like it requires, I was thinking as you were talking, like it requires understanding the costs on every side, right? It's like there are costs to you perhaps as a musician if you choose to do this, and there are costs to your listeners and fans. And I think for a long time we've been like, oh, well, we don't want to pay any of those costs, so we'll just use Spotify. So there's less cost for everyone. But then also we're all getting extracted from and exploited when we do that. Like the cost of a musician choosing not to share an album on Spotify is that you have to promote it. You have to build an audience yourself and you have to promote it to that audience. That is a lot of work, but that work is enduring work. Once you have that audience created and gathered, like they are your community, as opposed to investing all of your time in Spotify, which I think doesn't serve like the dividends, or like they can change the rules of the game at any moment and everything you've invested could kind of disappear. And then as a listener, we have to make different choices. Like if I understand the harms that Spotify is causing or the ways they're changing the music industry and I don't like them, I have to take on the cost of supporting musicians in different ways. And so that's just like one example that we've unpacked over and over again on this podcast. But I also think about journalists, right? If the traditional newsroom is disappearing, which it is in many, many instances, or when it's not, many journalists are choosing to leave because of the ethics of not wanting to be told by Jeff Bezos what they can write in the Washington Post, for instance. Right? So if journalists are being pushed out or leaving for values aligned reasons, and they're going to places like Substack, we were just talking before we came on, like, I'm not in the habit of paying journalists directly for their reporting. It's a muscle I feel like I really have to build. Like, when I notice that I'm reading a lot of reporting, I have to be like, oh, I need to pay this person. And it was interesting for me, like, in the realm of art, I'm so used to this idea of like, I need to pay artists. Artists need to get paid. But in the realm of news, I'm so used to receiving my news as like a free thing that comes to me through TV or email or whatever it might be. And, you know, newspapers have been trying to change that model for decades at this point to get people to pay for it. And it's been a real struggle. And yeah, I just love this point that you're making that, like, if getting rid of the middlemen is a priority for us, if we want to push back against the traditional industries, which are imbued with racism, sexism, all of these like isms, then we do have to step into a different paradigm. And that's going to require reconsidering like what things actually cost and what they are actually worth to us. And then, like, what's the phrase? Like, putting our money where our mouth is, I suppose.
A parallel that I'm seeing in this, to take it outside of content, is just like the conversation around fast fashion and getting so conditioned to, oh, I can just buy a new outfit and it's going to not cost me much at all for this event. And that's just what I do. And then realizing, oh, wait, there's people in other countries who are getting paid like less than poverty wages to make this clothing. And if I say that I care about people, I probably should be reconsidering how I'm buying my clothes. Not just caring about people, also caring about the environment. But then when people start to unpack, I hear all of these excuses. And I'm not saying I've never bought fast fashion, even after knowing about this. But like, my outfit right now is completely second hand except for my bra. Like, I have shifted how I approach things, but it took time. And that meant, like, even for this Beyonce concert that's coming up, last time I didn't adequately plan, and like the morning of, I'm going to Target and buying clothes, which is not my normal practice. And then this time I was like, oh wait, I don't want to be there again. So I'm going to start thrifting several months in advance so I can find things so that I can have an outfit that I like for Beyonce that only cost me $3 because I'm mostly using stuff that I already have, and also is like not impacting the environment as much. So I just share that as an example of, this is a years long of me having to learn how to make different decisions to value the environment and value people on the other side of the globe. That was not at all in my consciousness. And I feel very much in the early stages of valuing people bringing their art and exchanging for their art, their journalism, whatever it might be. And that's going to be a muscle that probably will take me a while to build.
I mean, we've been talking about the shift in music streaming, but like, I never questioned the shift in TV show streaming, right? I'm not out here like quitting Netflix this year. So many ways I can self-reflect for myself. Like, there are many indie filmmakers who you can directly purchase their releases online. Like, you can buy them from them. There are ways to do that. And I am so rarely doing that. Similarly, there are a few YouTubers I know who you can buy their videos. They have other platforms where you can support them and buy their content instead of just streaming it on YouTube and participating in the ad model. And I love your example of fast fashion and how you've been on this journey of changing that behavior. I was just thinking about that this morning because I was purchasing some clothes from Lucy and Yak, which is like a very, I guess, Instagram popular company. They make these like jumpsuits and overalls and all these fun printed patterns. And they, in their own words, are like an ethical fashion company, and they do a lot to like make very explicit how they source their fabrics and where their clothes are produced, which is like a cool thing on their website. You can see the actual like factories and warehouses they work with across the world. But I was reading one of the reviews, like it took me a long time to make a purchase from them because they're based in the UK and it's very expensive to do returns if something doesn't fit. And because especially like they're very size inclusive, but because I have such trouble with sizing as like a small fat person, I've just avoided them and I decided I was going to take the plunge. This is now a very long story just to tell everyone about a comment I saw on their website. but, but when I was reading like endless reviews of each of the items I wanted to purchase, which was just a pair of pants and a pair of dungarees and one shirt. I bought 3 things and I read so many reviews. And the one that stuck out to me the most was for these pants. And these pants were $60 USD. And it said, I wore these pants for 2 years and then they got a hole in them. And I think for how expensive they were, that never should have happened. And I was like, whoa, I was just like, what paradigm are you coming from? Like $60 for a pair of like ethically sourced to whatever extent we think that, like pants, like, okay, I'm taking from this comment, like, you think that's expensive. You wore them for 2 years. And like it's really felt to me like this was like some very confused like fast fashion meets like a misunderstanding of like how fabric works paradigm. But it just really struck me in that moment that like, wow, okay, there are so many different ways that our expectation for like cost and artistry and our values come into play in our purchases. And I was so intrigued by like what this person expected from this pair of pants that they didn't get. Also, they still gave the pants a 5-star review. Like the review was 5 stars and then these complaints. So I was very interested. But going back to your like Beyonce concert and thrifting example, I absolutely like had the same struggle as you when I went on the Renaissance tour. Like I had a skirt from Target that I saw multiple other people at the tour wearing. It was bright silver. And I had like a velvet top from Old Navy because I had not thought about it. I had not planned. The one thing I had planned, I had like ordered a pair of earrings off of Etsy that I was really excited about and wanted to wear, but I had avoided finding an outfit. And so I turned to fast fashion for that. Absolutely. Like I definitely did. And I've been thinking a lot more about how I get clothes. And I just purchase them so infrequently that it's not something I've had to confront a lot or often, really, because I don't buy many clothes. But I think that what really struck me there in my own behavior and in some of what you're sharing is like how often my behavior suggests that my highest value is my own convenience, and how I would like that to not be the case so much. Like, I love when things can be easeful and feel good, but I don't think that like my convenience is worth like the exploitation of the planet and other people. And I'm trying to confront that in my consumerism and my behavior more and more frequently.
Yeah, it's a muscle that we build, and it's something that like takes time and often means that we consume less. I sent you this article from Tracy Chapman just talking about like the re-release of her album that has Fast Car on it. There is a whole country singer. If you didn't see that duet, it's lovely. You'll probably tear up. And one of the things she says in the article is like she is really committed to only buying physical music. And so she says that means I listen to a lot less music because I have to go and buy it and bring it home and listen to it. And it's just this reminder that everything didn't always used to be endless, and you used to have to actually exchange not just money but also time to go someplace and get it and experience it. And I wonder if you value it differently because of what it took for you to get it in that exchange. So that's one side of the things, is talking about the consumption. I am also curious, something that we've been talking about is this idea of being someone who wants to share our work and having a platform. You mentioned this earlier, like, yeah, if you want to do this, you got to build a platform. It takes time for you to build this platform. And the idea of platforms came up in, I believe, the Spotify Patreon report. It also came up in some internet, I don't even know if drama is like the best word from it, but like some turmoil, some angst. Angst, I think, is what it is. It's very much angst.
Yeah, we saw some angst on Substack over the weekend for sure. And I, your not reporter, Amelia Hruby, am here to tell you all about it. So over the past week or so, maybe a little longer actually, Glennon Doyle started a Substack newsletter and launched a Substack with like a paid offering as part of it, which is very standard. If you don't know what Substack is, it started as a newsletter service. So you could write a newsletter and you can monetize your newsletter, have emails that only go to paid subscribers, get people to upgrade, make money. They have since launched an app. They now have video. It's become much more than like an email newsletter service. They make podcasts, or they allow you to host and sell podcasts. And so Substack has become a platform for creators, particularly like online creators, specifically writers. That's who they initially positioned themselves for. Although now they have done deals with YouTubers. They're really trying to bring video and podcast creators onto the platform. So it's become much broader. And when Glennon Doyle joined Substack and launched her Substack, there was this subset of people, like many people in my notes feed, who were very stressed and upset and angst-ridden about the fact that Glennon was now on Substack. And I will be honest, like when I said at the beginning that like this episode would be full of like white women freaking out, it was all white women that I witnessed making these posts. So essentially like Glennon has posted her first Substack newsletters, and people are going to Notes, which is like Substack's Twitter section, to post all their feelings about the fact that she has joined the platform. It was just like a lot of stress and scarcity around this fear that one, Substack was just becoming social media, and all the people who succeeded on social media were coming to Substack and bringing the expectations and standards for success that had like thrived on social media. They're bringing that to this platform that people had previously perceived to be their like quote unquote safe space, I think, where like, we don't have to do the Instagram thing. We don't have to be a personal brand. On Substack, I can just be a writer and share my writing and make money. That seemed to be like what I was taking from the notes I was seeing. And then also there was this other undercurrent that was like, subscription fatigue is real. Fewer and fewer people seem to be wanting to pay for Substack newsletters. And if everybody's going to start paying for Glennon Substack, they're going to stop paying for mine. There was this like deep scarcity that I saw. And so I was so intrigued by this discourse because to me, it really laid bare, one, that people really think Substack has made them some promises that it has not. Substack has been, to me, like clearly becoming a social media platform for like years now at this point. And this idea that it's sort of like a safe space for writers where you'll never have to try to succeed like you're on social media. Like no one was ever promised that. I don't know why people believe that. I just think it's been demonstrably false for a really long time. And so like holding on to that is just like keeping a veil over your head. I don't understand. I'm just like, open your eyes, my friends. And then also, I think it really speaks to this breakdown of like what we think being a writer is, how we think writers are entitled to earn money, who we think is entitled to be on a platform. This is all like baffling to me. And then the final thing I'll say, or I just kind of wanted to amend what I said earlier, is I think people are also really conflating having a platform and having an audience. And like, to me, an audience is the people that you've gathered. That's like how many people are paying attention to you and how much do they care about you and all these different factors. And then a platform, sometimes we call an audience our platform, but when I say Substack is a platform, what I mean is that it has set up this space where we are all going to get and bring our audience, and it sets all the rules of the space. It decides what a post is, how you can send things out. Like it's the built space. The platform is the built space that we do our creating and audience gathering in. And so Substack makes the rules. Like it is the platform on which I grow my audience. And I think that is a lot of the issue here, is that people think that Substack is some sort of like neutral non-thing, or it's like made them these promises that they can build their writing career a certain way. And I just don't think Substack ever did that. And it's been pretty clear about how it's been building the platform and what it's prioritizing along the way. So like Glennon Doyle coming to Substack is a huge win for Substack, right? Like she already has hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Like they're going to make a lot of money off of her when they take their 10% cut. And they're going to prioritize that over everybody in Notes being like, Substack's not for me anymore. And maybe I sound not compassionate or empathetic, but I kind of feel like that. I kind of feel like, y'all, wake up. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Now I'm actually ranting.
Yeah, no, I think It is interesting. Yeah, when you think about like a technology platform, which clearly, like you said, they set the rules. And I was talking about this beforehand, but I do feel like people are a little delulu and not in a positive way about the games that they're playing, the rules that they're following, the promises that they think people are making to them, and also like what it will take for them to get to where they want to be. And this is me with a Capricorn stellium. And this is me like a little bit talking to myself too, because when I first heard that about Glennon Doyle, I think people just think that she made it. But like when I think of her, I think of her as one of the OG mommy bloggers who was like way, way, way back in the day, gathering these people around her by sharing for at least a decade, maybe close to 2 decades at this point. And then they're mad that she has these people who want to follow her. And so that's the one part I don't understand is like, you're mad because she's been at this longer and like has found people who resonate with her. Isn't that what you want? Like, shouldn't you be happy that that's possible for someone else because that means that it's possible for you? And then the second piece is like the whole technology platform Delulu. I'm seeing this on Threads too, which has started ads in the last since this year, however many months of this year is 5 years. Five. That was a Freudian slip because this year has felt like 5 years. But people were being mad about that and using the words like Threads is my safe space. Threads is blah, 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 blah. Can't we just have a space where we can just connect? And it's like, no, not if it's free, because they have to make money somehow. And I don't understand. So those two thoughts are not necessarily connected, except from the piece of I do not understand. Like these things are not computing and it's not secret knowledge. It just is pretty out there in the open. You have to, if you're spending a decade or two building something, probably people are going to want to follow you if they continue to like what you like. If a company is a company because it makes money, they're going to keep making decisions to make them money, whether or not those decisions are in your best interest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is that like Glennon has been doing this for a long time, but she's just very successful. And I think what really came through in a lot of people's angst was their envy. And it's okay to be envious. I'm not here to critique that. Like I am often jealous or envious of other people's success. But also like that doesn't mean that I need to construct some sort of like morally righteous argument for why what they're doing is wrong. And that's a lot of what I felt like I was seeing. I was really seeing people try to prove to themselves that Glennon was doing something wrong by starting a Substack newsletter and by like coming into their space or taking their subscribers. And I just don't think that's the case. And yes, it is quite possible that many of us could write online for 10 or 20 years and never achieve Glennon's degree of success or number of followers. Like that feels true to me. And it also is like, if I'm really honest with myself, I don't want the trade-offs that it takes to get there either. I don't want the public scrutiny. I don't want that type of status where you feel like you can't start a newsletter without everybody having an opinion about it, right? And I think that something that I'm always saying to business owners, like through Off the Grid and the other contexts of my business, is just like, if you really want this thing, there will be compromises you have to make along the way. Like there are beautiful examples of ways where we can get the success we want entirely on our own terms. But if the success that you want involves dealing with these like traditional systems and institutions, there will always be like compromises or trade-offs somewhere in that journey, right? If you want a book deal, there's going to be trade-offs you have to make to work with the publishing industry. If you want a ginormously successful Substack newsletter, there are compromises that you're going to have to make around maybe like what you think of a VC-funded tech company and their priorities versus your priorities. Like, that's just part of like being a creator in the world. Similarly, right? Like we've already talked about Sinners. Like there were so many other films that Ryan Coogler had to make to get to work with the industry to get this deal, right? And so I think that it's always just so important to me to like surface that and make those things visible and talk about them so that we can make informed choices and we can like they kind of like sometimes people talk about the concept of like choosing your hard, which I find flawed as a concept because a lot of the hard we face has nothing to do with choice. But sometimes I think like if I'm looking at two paths, like for recently I was looking at self-publishing versus traditional publishing, and I was kind of like choosing my hard. Like this will be hard in these ways, this will be hard in these ways. Which challenges am I taking on knowingly and willingly? And I think that a lot of people are just living in a delusion that they can just like get what they want without having to face those challenges or take on those compromises. And instead of like really grappling with that, they just like project all of it into a note about somebody they've never talked to or are going to meet and why what they're doing is so wrong.
This is reminding me of a conversation we had a long time ago for Bando. It was an Instagram live back when you were still on Instagram. And one of the things we talked about was jealousy. And what came up for me as you were saying that is like, what is your jealousy pointing you towards? Like, envy, jealousy is a part of the human experience. And is it pointing you towards, oh, this is ultimately what I want and this is what it would take to get there? Or this is something I think I want, but when I sit with it, I'm not willing to do what it takes to get there. And most people are not having that conversation. And it is interesting to see people bypass having that conversation and go directly into demonizing someone else. And even part of that conversation for me around jealousy is just admitting, yeah, like someone has different access to resources than I do. And that sucks, but that's the reality of the situation. And like, there's work that we can all do to help change that. And it's probably going to take more than a Substack post about you demonizing one person who is benefiting from a system that needs to be dismantled. That's another thing is like, are we critiquing the right actors here? And I don't think Glennon Doyle is the person that we need to be critiquing if you're really upset about like who's getting more proximity to fame. I know that we want to talk a little bit more about Sinners, so I'm going to bring up just really briefly, I'll link it in the show notes. Some of what you were saying about like the trade-offs that we have to make made me think of going to South by Southwest last year and seeing the Daniels, the directors of Everything Everywhere All at Once, talk about how they made Everything Everywhere All at Once happen. And they talk a little bit too about like how they've been able to make really weird out there movies and also make a living. And a little bit of it is this like one for them, one for us model where they're just really explicit. Like, we got to do this commercial that's going to make us a lot of money, but then we get to make Everything Everywhere All at Once. And it could just be an example for people of how to be really realistic in the trade-offs instead of delulu derogatory. Yeah, so I will put that in the show notes, but I know that we want to talk about Sinners as a film, not just as a source of discourse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, I also think that our conversation of like whiteness can take us right into that because it was not lost on me at all, as I've already said, that like all of the people I saw sort of stepping into this space were white women. And that has a lot to do with my own feed, I'm sure, and like who I'm actually, I guess, subscribed to on Substack and like the makeup of gender and race there. So I can own that as well. But that was not lost on me. I also feel at this moment I need to disclose that I was on Glennon's podcast and have benefited from the size of her audience. And maybe felt like some of these critiques were people feeling entitled to a sort of like boost from her platform or something that I felt was really odd, but that I have benefited from myself and I'm sure like impacts my take on this. And that can take me right into all of the white vampire songs in Sinners. So Taylor, maybe I will ask you first, like, did you have favorite moments from this film or things that as you're like remembering it really stand out for you?
Yes. And I think just if it is not abundantly clear right now, we're getting into spoiler territory. Listen at your own risk. Okay. So 2 scenes stick out to me. One is the scene that, at least in my circles, everyone is talking about, the juke joint scene, where essentially the main character is conjuring spirits through his voice. And I part of being a highly sensitive person means that I'm really moved by music, and especially live music experiences. So I told Matt afterwards, I'm like, I've never quite envisioned it that way, but that is the experience. That is my experience when I'm truly engaged in this art that is becoming a communal experience versus just me listening in my headphones or in my home. So there was something really beautiful about that scene. And beyond the fact that it's shot beautifully, the way the music goes together is just, it's a stunning scene. I haven't seen anything quite like it. The other thing that struck me, and this gets to some of the whiteness things, is with the vampires, just the reasoning that they were using. So in the movie, the vampires are wanting Miles, one of the main characters' voice, essentially because the main vampire, Remick, wants to use his voice to conjure up the spirits that he's missing. And all of these other Black people are collateral damage that the vampires are eating and putting them into this kind of undead forever state. And all of these people come, the white and the Black vampires, and the language that they're using is all love and light language. Like, basically, it sucks here, so you come into this undead state, and then everything's going to be amazing, and it'll be sunshine and roses. And, like, their voices get higher pitched when they're talking about it. And it just felt eerily reminiscent of conversations that I've had with white people and white women around race, where it's like, yeah, this sucks, but like, wouldn't it just all get fixed if we don't talk about it and we pretend like it's all kumbaya and amazing? And so seeing those snippets of scenes, there's also a lot for me with the at the end when he chooses music, because I have been on my own journey of stepping away from Christianity and seeing the ways that Christianity and white supremacy are so intertwined. And so to see a movie where ultimately the person chose their art and their culture rather than what I was really worried, honestly, was going to be this literal come to Jesus moment of, okay, I'm going to give it all up at the foot of the cross. And no, he like chooses music and keeps playing music for the rest of his life. So that healed something in me, because I just grew up around a lot of like, witchcraft is evil, these things are evil. And it's like, funny that everything is evil that doesn't come from your culture. And like, isn't it really pretty witchy that we come to church and we say that we're drinking someone's blood and body, but the other cultures stuff is like evil witchcraft? But I digress.
Yeah, no, I really loved exactly what you're pointing to. So like the way that the film opens with this scene of Miles like entering the church and his father, who's the pastor, like asking him to drop the neck of the guitar. And then we cut back to like 24 hours earlier, and we learn that that's his father and that's like his family's church, and his father doesn't support Miles playing music, but Miles loves playing music and playing the guitar and singing. And then it ends there, sort of like with him going back and then being asked to like drop the guitar again and driving away. And I thought that that was a really powerful statement about the role of, spirituality, maybe versus religion, although I don't know if I want to make that strong of a statement, but like the way that there were these obviously like spiritual experiences of music that they had at the juke joint, and these like ancestral lineage of music that's being brought in there. And then I was with you. I was like, oh no, are we just going to church at the end? And that's just the end? That cannot be this. I was like, that cannot be what we're doing here. So I was also very glad that Miles like drove away from it. And I loved the, I guess like credit scene or epilogue even is how it felt, where we have, Miles as like buddy guy, really, as like an elder, and like still playing music and making music and having named the club after like the woman from that night. And for me, one of the most like striking moments of the film, most striking like pieces of dialogue, like what definitely made the end stick with me so much, is where Miles is like, as the old man like asks his cousin who's now a vampire, like that day, like up until that night, it was like the best day of my life and like still is. And like I teared up. I was like, this is so beautiful. And what like a powerful reminiscence on like how we can hold that type of like beauty and joy, even when we just watched a whole movie about how it turned into the worst moments full of such loss. Like, I don't know. I thought there was just something really, really striking and beautiful about it.
It's so gorgeous, and it's such a celebration of Black people unapologetically, and everyone's gorgeous. Like, it's just, oh, it made my heart so happy for so many reasons to watch that film. And yeah, I kind of want my parents to see it. I told my mom it's probably too scary for her, but because of their still very entrenched in Christianity, I don't know that they'll see it. But there's something too about like the way that Black pain is really transformed and transmuted through music. And that was another thing too about this movie, is like the KKK is present, but it's not a trauma film. It's not like, let's remind everyone how hard Black people had it. There are elements of that, but the main story is about like Black artistry, Black creativity, and how these people want it. Which brings us full circle to the beginning, because how ironic is it that we're having this conversation about should a Black person, should a Black man own his work, when that's the plot of the story just happening like nearly 100 years earlier, but we're still having these same conversations. So the fact that he got to make it and make it a very, very Black movie is just something that, like, I'm excited for when he gets the rights back in 25 years and what he continues to do. That I'm hoping that like there'll be a re-release in some indie theaters. Like, I'm just thinking of all of the things that can come from this continuing to be owned by him as a Black man. I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about it. It's just I haven't had something stick with me like this in quite a while.
Yeah. And I've said this on the podcast before, like there is something about going to see a movie in theaters that is so much more immersive than any other like screened environment that we're in, right? And having movies still be created without that like a second screen in mind, as they say now, right? That like when you're watching Netflix, they assume you have another screen that you're scrolling at the same time. And I think that I love going to see movies because it doesn't feel like that. It's not, they're not trying to reach me despite the second screen. Like when I'm in a theater, we're all on the same page that this is what we're doing together. And I love that. And I feel like films like this really deserve and benefit from that. Like I would have hated to see this go direct to streaming. It would have been so buried. And of course, there are so many other brilliant films and brilliant Black films specifically that have gone to streaming and been buried in those ways. And that's why it's so important that Ryan Coogler has the rights to the film, or they will revert to him. And that's why it's so important that directors and writers can be involved in these conversations and have different types of deals with the studio, because I think that as viewers, we don't always realize how much power the studio has to shape our experience of a film. Like we think it's all the director, but the studio, I think, has just as much, if not more, power in what we take from it. So, yeah. The only other very random thing I wanted to shout out was actually from something that you said a moment ago about, like, white women trying to sort of, like, kumbaya you to not talk about race. And on the most recent season of Drag Race, season 17, which I just watched last weekend, one of the queens creates this sort of group that she calls the Kumbaya Girls, which is full of white queens who cannot take criticism and who cannot like read each other. Like they take things really personally and they can't handle it. And Lexi is like, yeah, they're the Kumbaya Girls. It's like her and her and her and her. And like, we can't just like go at it with them because they take it all personally. And I really like that as a shorthand just for And in the show, she doesn't like explicitly say it's about whiteness, but when she names the queens, I'm like, yeah, it absolutely is. And just like as I think I'm going to start using it as a shorthand for like when these things happen or when I witness them or am complicit in them, like just a sort of like, yeah, you're just being a kumbaya girl feels like a phrase that's going to come into my vernacular thanks to Lexi from Drag Race.
I love that. And how synchronous that I happen to use kumbaya and that's related to Drag Race. Should we end our show on that moment of synchronicity?
I think so. I think that we have unpacked a lot today. So, dear listener, if you're still here with us, thank you. We would love to know what you think about Sinners. And if you enjoy the film, if you like horror movies, I want to know. Please be my friend. I need more friends who like horror films. I love that Taylor sees them for the culture, but also I go see like all of them. So if you want to be horror friends, let me know. We can follow each other on Letterboxd and be cute about it. But if you like Sinners, would love to hear any and all thoughts you have about it. If you have thoughts on the state of the creator economy, we are very open to hearing about it. If you are big on Substack and also witnessed all of the Glennon angst, we'll take your takes on that as well. Please know that we say all of this and make our critiques with love. Big feelings come up. We get it. But also, you know, we can't just be a kumbaya girl about it. Feel free to tell us in the chat. Really, anything you want to talk about, we would love to chit chat and comment with you at thoughtofyou.substack.com. We also always appreciate if you share the podcast with your friends, the ones that like you send them links in your group chats. Send a link to Thought of You to them and say, hey, Thought of You when I listen to Thought of You. It's a really easy, silly thing to text. So let's do that.
Thank y'all so much for listening.
Thanks, friends. See you next month.